What's going on, everybody? Welcome in. Today we're going to be breaking down the Ice Shards Sorcerer build in Diablo IV. Now there's a lot of buzz around this build. It's very strong and popular. There's a couple of different ways to run this build and you have a lot of different options. So we're going to dive into the different options that you do have, how you can run this build and customize it for yourself, and what are the core elements of it that keep it going. What makes it work? Why is it so good? And what gear should you be hunting for in order to bring this build online? What aspects do you need? What attributes are you looking for on your pieces of gear? What makes it a good piece of gear for this build? So we're going to break down all of that for you guys in this video. I hope you enjoy. All right, so let's just hop right into it. So just to cover the build, we're gonna first go through the skills. Obviously, like, that's the core of the build. Quickly, we're just gonna touch on what's on my bar. So I'm running Blizzard, Ice Armor, Frost Nova, Deep Freeze, Ice Shards, and Teleport. The first thing that you might notice is that I don't have a basic skill bound to my bar. I'm basically using Ice Shards as my basic skill. Now that's possible because of a couple of different item attributes that I have, along with some aspects and one of my Paragon boards that I'm able to basically generate infinite mana. It's not literally infinite, but you build enough mana where it's not a problem. You're not mana starved most of the time, especially in large groups of minions. So we're just going to go through all the skills and all of the gear sets that make this build possible. So first, let's take a look at what we're going to be doing on our skill tree. You need at least 1 point in Firebolt. Your second point can go anywhere. We don't have a basic skill on our bar, so it doesn't matter. You just need the 2 points to get to the next tree. In this tree, you want to max out Ice Shards. All right, so put as many points into Ice Shards as possible. As you see, I have rank 8 out of 5. I also have bonus ranks of Ice Shards on my gear. Very nice, because it still continues to give you bonus damage beyond rank 5. You get the enhanced Ice Shards, and I go for destructive Ice Shards, which allows hitting with 5 consecutive Ice Shards in one cast to make an enemy vulnerable for 2 seconds. This is a huge multiplier against bosses in single target DPS fights. And if you get the aspect, I'll show you through my gear in a minute, there's an aspect that allows your Ice Shards to pierce enemies, which means that you're going to be able to apply vulnerable to a large group of adds in a line if you can group them up and get multiple hit with one cast. I also have 2 points in Potent Warding. It's just for a little bit of defense. I actually have a pretty tanky Sorcerer, which is nice because the biggest drawback to running Sorcerer is that you can get one shot. You know, especially when you're playing on hardcore, the worst thing that can happen if you're dealing a ton of damage is you randomly step in something that you didn't see, or you get CC'd for a second and you just die. And you have no counter. Doesn't matter how many barriers you have if you get one shot. So Potent Warding is very good. After you cast a non-basic skill, you gain resistance to all elements. Got a couple points in there. Speaking of tankiness, I'm also running Teleport, which is on a 9.8 second, 7 second cooldown with a point in Shimmering Teleport. So after I teleport, I get 30% damage reduction for 3 seconds, which is really nice because typically you're either teleporting into a group of minions to get that damage reduction and then popping your Frost Nova for an AoE freeze, or you're teleporting out of CC if you're in a large group of minions. Either way, 30% damage reduction, fantastic to have. I have 1 point in Elemental Attunement, which gives me a chance to reset one of my defensive skills. As you may have seen, I have 4 out of 6 of my skills are defensive, so this is huge. It's not a very high chance, but in this build we have a lot of lucky crit or lucky hit and a lot of critical strike, so we're going to be proccing this relatively often considering how low a chance this is. If I had more points to put in, I would put all 3, but I only have 1 point in this just because I want it to be an option. Putting multiple points I don't see as necessary, but you can do whatever you'd like with your build. 1 rank in Ice Armor, 1 rank in Frost Nova. You just need to unlock them. I have Shimmering Ice Armor so that I have a chance to freeze enemies when they hit me, because most of my damage comes from when enemies are frozen. It has really good synergy with the Ice Shards enchantment, which I'll go through in a second. But basically, you're going to be hitting enemies with free automatic Ice Shards every time an enemy is frozen. So this is really nice. Damage against vulnerable enemies contributing to your barrier. Typically, I haven't really found too much of an issue with my barrier not being strong enough. It's just you want more uptime on the barrier. So doing damage to generate more barrier while it's active isn't necessarily the most necessary attribute. It can be good probably a little bit later on when your barrier is active and it's getting chunked down by large groups of mobs. So there might be some merit in running Mystical Ice Armor. I just like the Shimmering. Mystical Frost Nova, so that when you AoE CC, not only do you freeze, you're applying vulnerable for 4 seconds, increase to 6 seconds against bosses. So you're just starting off the fight by making everything vulnerable. Really good. 3 points into precision magic. This just boosts our lucky hit chance. All of the major parts of this build are going to be built off of getting lucky hits, so we want to max this out as much as possible. We have 1 point in Align the Elements, which is very nice to have 1% damage reduction up to 40% against elites for every second that you haven't been hit by one, so that's really good. And then 3 points into Protection. Using a cooldown grants 30% of your max life as a barrier for 2 seconds. All of my skills that aren't damage dealer are cooldowns. So using a cooldown, each one of those 4 cooldowns is going to generate me a barrier for 2 seconds. It's actually 2.3 seconds because I have 3 points in, where is it? In Icy Veil. My barriers have 15% increased duration. So I'm going to be getting bonus barriers on top of using this cooldown, bonus duration. So I'm going to have almost 100% uptime on these barriers, which is really nice. See a lot of people go into mana shield, but the way that this build works is every time you spend 100 mana, you gain 5% damage reduction. That sounds really nice. It can go up to 15%, but with the avalanche passive, which we'll see in a second, I'll just show you now, your frost skills have a chance on lucky hit to make my next cast of Ice Shards, Frozen Orb, or Blizzard consume no mana and deal 40% increased damage. Chances doubled against vulnerable enemies. They're always going to be vulnerable, which makes it a 20% chance on lucky hit pretty much at all times, but the cost of the Ice Shards and the Blizzard is 0, so you're not actually spending mana, and a lot of the time you're going to be spending you're going to be casting at 100 mana or higher, so you won't be benefiting from this mana shield a lot of the time. Sometimes you will, and it's usually when you run out of mana, which is cool because, you know, that's kind of your downtime, but that's what we have other defensive cooldowns for. I didn't think that this was worth points in my skill tree. I have 5 points in Blizzard. I only have 1 point in Blizzard, but 4 of them are coming from an item, which is really nice. I also have it so that when I have an active Blizzard, my core skills cost 10% mana. This is just so you can keep it going, because until you get those first lucky hit procs, sometimes you can run a little bit low on mana, so having it cost less mana is nice, and that comboed with a couple of other things in this build that we'll go through in a second help to keep you topped off on mana when you are not getting your avalanche procs. Now, I also have 3 points in this Icy Veil, 0 points in Snap Freeze, and 0 points in Cold Front. A lot of people do run points into Snap Freeze and Cold Front, which is really nice. The way that I have my build run, I kind of like the guaranteed damage on Icy Touch, and I also have some points over here in Warmth. We'll go through why that works in a second. We just need to first take a look at the enchantments. So the enchantments, we have the Firebolt enchantment and Ice Shards. Now, you might ask, why are you running Firebolt enchantment if you're not running fire skills? Firebolt enchantment actually allows direct damage from skills, which I have, my core skill is Ice Shards. So every time that deals damage, it is going to apply a burn, even though it's an ice skill. So since it applies a burn, we can benefit from all of the points in the skill tree that give bonuses to burn damage, or enemies that are burning. Same thing with your gear, damage reduction against burning enemies, damage bonuses against burning enemies. Those will all now be unlocked because of this enchantment. The other enchantment is Ice Shards enchantment, our bread and butter, where Ice Shards will automatically conjure and fly towards frozen enemies. So they have to be frozen. Now that being said, Frost Nova is going to do an AoE freeze, which amounts to a massive it amounts to a massive wave clear potential. When you jump into a group of enemies, AoE stun them with your freeze, apply vulnerability, and then without even touching them, you're going to be sending out Ice Shards that are going to apply burn, that are going to blow up these enemies and have crazy crit multipliers because of all the other stuff that's in our build before you even spend any mana or anything on a cast. So you don't even need to cast half the time to clear groups of trash mobs. It's very, very nice. It actually looks kind of silly when you get it going and you have enough damage built into your kit. So those are the enchantments. Really strong, and we're going to go back into the skill tree and just break down what benefits we're getting here from the burning. So you put 1 point in Inner Flames, you're not getting anything from this because you don't have a pyromancy skill. You're doing burn damage, but those skills are not classified as pyromancy. If you see up top, conjuration, pyromancy, and then this is core frost, right? Like, so it's designated as a frost skill. So you're not actually getting any benefit from this, but you are getting benefit from the Devouring Blaze, where we deal bonus or increased critical strike damage against burning enemies, which is all of them. If they are immobilized Frozen does not count as an immobilize. We don't have an immobilize in our kit, but when bosses get stunned, when their stun meter goes off, it counts as being CC'd or crowd controlled by every type of crowd control. Immobilize, stun, freeze, chill, slow, any type of CC in the game is applied during that bar, when that bar pops. So it's increased to 150%. You're going to be benefiting from that in boss fights when you can stun them. Insane damage potential, especially on a crit build with these multipliers. And we'll go into this in a second, but critical damage is a multiplicative multiplier, which basically just means really good. Multiplicative, good, additive, okay. Critical strike and vulnerable damage, which is what we're speccing into, are both multiplicative. And that is very good for your damage scaling. This tree, I have 3 points into permafrost, so our frost skills, which is all of our damage dealers, deal 15% increased damage to elites. We have 9% increased damage to chilled enemies and 18% increased damage to frozen enemies. Because we're getting benefits from chill, this is why I have Blizzard on my bar, because it applies chill. If you don't get an insta-kill with everything from your Frost Nova, you can just use your Blizzard to really control fights, to slow enemies, apply chill, and get more damage bonuses. It will apply freeze once enough stacks of chill are on an enemy. It will actually freeze them, so you can get benefits of the freeze bonuses during your downtime on Frost Nova, which is really nice. So 18% increased damage to frozen, 9% against chilled enemies. This is crucial for your build. Frigid Breeze. On lucky hit, cold damage, which is Ice Shards and Blizzard, against vulnerable enemies, which will be all of them, has up to a 20% chance to generate 15 mana. Now, this is super good because it helps get you ramped up in fights, getting those procs of Avalanche. Because until you proc Avalanche, because it's only a chance, it's a low chance to proc, to get free casts, until you get that scaling, you need to spend some mana. Now, this can help you get your mana back very quickly without having to waste aspects on mana gen. This is really nice. 8% increased cold damage to vulnerable enemies. You're just scaling your vulnerable damage, which again is multiplicative against enemies that you're going to be peppering with vulnerable from Frost Nova and Ice Shards. And then for defensive, I also have up 3 points into warmth. So you get 1 point into Fiery Surge, gives you a little bit more mana gen, so it's not that bad. 10% for 3 seconds when you kill a burning enemy, which will be all of them. Increased burning damage, this is negligible. We're not doing much burning damage at all. But then we get 3, it unlocks this, warmth. Every 1 second, you heal for 0.9% of your max life, and the more max life you have, the more you're healing, for each nearby burning enemy. So 41 health per second I'm healing per burning enemy. If there's a mob of 5, I'm healing for about 200 a second, because I have all of these mobs on fire. And increased to 1.8%, so that's 82 or so, against bosses, which is really nice. So you're getting that increased healing against bosses, which keeps you topped off if you're out of pots, or if you really just need to focus on DPSing in a boss fight, etc. It's going to be healing you up, and you're going to have barriers up at all times. So if you end up in between barriers, you get hit really hard, you're low, you pop another cooldown, get a barrier going, and you're going to be healing your base health while that barrier is up. Or you're going to be activating your deep freeze, which is kind of your oh shit button, your get out of jail. It makes you completely immune, breaks CC, chills enemies in a massive AoE. The damage that it does is actually considered direct damage for whatever reason. So it actually will burn enemies too. So deep freeze will just light everything on fire in the area. So you can benefit from all these other burning passives. And then it also you'll gain 10% of your life as a barrier for each enemy that you freeze while deep freeze is active. And it cuts your cooldowns, your non-ultimate cooldowns, in half when the deep freeze ends. So it's really good if you catch yourself with no cooldowns. You've used Frost Nova, you used Ice Armor, you use Teleport for your shield or the damage reduction, and you're like, oh no, I'm running low on mana for whatever reason. I need to just kind of chill and buy some time. Pop your deep freeze, use it to cut these cooldowns in half, buy yourself some time, get a big barrier, and it's just a major defensive that helps chain this build together. Now also, this is a 60-second cooldown. Since it's going to be reducing all of these cooldowns, all your other cooldowns, and they're going to be active again, If you manage to proc this, the critical strikes have a 5% chance to reset the cooldown of one of your defensive skills. It is likely going to be this one because it's the longest skill. So even though it's a 60-second cooldown, it might get instantly reset in 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, whatever. So it's a major help to keep your survivability up in fights, which is why you need at least 1 point in this. I do want to point out I'm not running Glass Cannon. I know a lot of people will run Glass Cannon in Sorcerer builds because it's enticing to get that increased damage. You can get up to 18% increased damage, but take 9% more. Now, you might argue that 9% more damage isn't that big a deal for dealing 18. It's a good trade-off, but sorcerers tend to be pretty squishy. And again, the main crux of this build is being able to stay alive, not get one shot, and have barriers up at all times. So that extra damage, if you get caught in between the barriers, it might be just enough to kill you. I can't tell you how many times I've been left with 200 HP after getting hit by a big attack from a boss, and I have to immediately pop my ice block. So you can run it if you want. You can spec into more damage, but it is a bit of a risk. If you're going to be doing that, you might as well just drop the potent warding or some other defensive skill and put a couple points into Glass Cannon. So that goes, you know, that covers the major points of the build. So now I'm going to go through the gear, the aspects, and all the different things that bring this build together, and we'll touch on the Paragon board as well and how I've kind of gone into it. I'm only level 67, so my Paragon board isn't completely fleshed out, but I definitely am working towards something that I think is working pretty well for me right now. This is the most important aspect in your build. The Avalanche Key passive now applies to 1 additional cast. So that means if you proc Avalanche, which makes your next cast of Ice Shards or Blizzard cost 0 mana. So when you proc this, there's a pretty high likelihood that you will get not 1, but 2 free casts of Ice Shards, your next 2. And each of those casts can also proc, you guessed it, Avalanche. So you see how when you have a ton of lucky hit, this build can kind of just go infinitely. One of the important things to note is on some of your gear, amulets especially, you can gain bonus ranks not just on your skills, but on your passives. So this one is +3 ranks of the Devouring Blaze passive. So it takes it from a 30% crit strike damage multiplier to a 60%, and from a 75% multiplier against immobilized targets, so bosses, to a 150%. That is massive damage increase that I'm getting from this amulet. I also deal 48% more damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen enemies, which is going to be giving me more damage when I'm freezing things with Blizzard and with Frost Nova. And it also applies this damage multiplier again to bosses when they are stunned. Bonus frost damage, mana cost reduction, movement speed, all really good. You want to be kiting a lot in a frost build, especially if you're running Blizzard, because you're going to be slowing and chilling enemies, moving around, avoiding blasts, and staying out of range and out of harm's way. So let's just go through the rest of the gear here. So we've got lucky hit chances increased by 20% when I have a barrier active. I'm going to have a barrier active at pretty much all times. This gives me a barrier. This is a cooldown, gives me a barrier. This is a cooldown, gives me a barrier. This gives me a barrier in the kit, but it's also a cooldown, so it will give me a barrier from potent warding as well. So I'm going to be having barriers up at all times. The other thing that gives me a barrier is this next skill. Damaging an elite enemy grants you a barrier, absorbing 2,500 damage for 10 seconds. This effect can only happen once every 30 seconds. So that's a 20-second downtime in fights against bosses or other elites, and that 20-second downtime can be mitigated with 6.9 seconds of ice armor because of the potent warding, 2.3 seconds of barrier from Frost Nova, 2.3 seconds of barrier from teleport, which is only on a 9.87 second cooldown. And also we'll see in a second that when we go into the Paragon boards, there is a legendary node that will give you a barrier every time you kill a, you guessed it, frozen enemy. So we're just going to have really nice synergy with all of our gear and all of our skills in this kit. This one is crucial. You absolutely need this to run the Ice Shards build. So the Ice Shards will pierce 4 times, dealing less damage, which isn't that big of a deal, per subsequent enemy hit. The reason it's so important to be doing piercing damage is because you are going to be applying that burn to every target hit, so you can get enemies in a line. If you're kiting, you aggro all the enemies, you pull them away, they bunch up, you slow them with your Blizzard, and apply chill, so you're getting modifiers on that, and then you just start pumping out ice shards through in a line, applying burn, and every time you hit all 5 ice shards on a target, which you can in a line, you're going to be applying vulnerability from your ice shards. You take 25% less damage from crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies. This is also just really nice synergy because we're going to be doing so much CC with our slows, with our freezes, and applying vulnerable to so many enemies, which is really nice. I have 2 damage reduction while crowd control impaired gems in this slot, mainly because on armor I like to I feel like getting control impaired and not having one of my major cooldowns up is pretty much the most vulnerable I can be, the most dangerous time for me as a mage. So 16% reduced damage reduction while I'm control impaired. It's just that I'm less likely to get one shot in the 3 seconds that I might be CC'd. So been working well for me so far. This is a sacred unique that I got to drop. Now there might be better things that you could run instead of this particular aspect, but I kind of like it and I've been working into it, and my critical strike chance has been increased by 20% of my movement speed bonus with this aspect. Now that's cool because if you remember, this amulet had movement speed. I believe I have movement speed on well, these boots come with movement speed as well, so you get 11% movement speed, 24% after killing an elite, and every time you evade you get a 65% movement speed bonus, which is nice. The math, the way it works out, I'm getting 20% of the bonus movement speed. So if you look at your stats, utility, movement speed. So I have 122%. My base movement speed is 100%. So right now my movement speed is 122. That's only a 22% bonus. So 20% bonus crit of 20 or 22, you're looking at what? 10% would be 2.2. So you're looking at like a 4% increase, right? So that's not much. That's not much at all. But every time I evade, I'm getting a 65% bonus movement to that movement speed, and that's additive. So it's 80 something percent, 87% bonus movement speed for 1 second after I evade, which is really nice. So that's going to beef up my critical strike chance like crazy for that 1 second that I have that bonus movement speed. And crit strike chance is actually notoriously low anyways, just across the board. Very hard to get bonus crit strike, but this right here is going to be giving me a bunch more movement, a bunch more crit strike chance every time I'm going to be evading, which is going to be often in these fights. It's also really nice to have the movement speed after you evade, just to start kiting more and to get away from enemies. Let's go into the weapon. So my weapon has deal 24% increased damage when you have a barrier active. That's just going to be basically a flat increase, 24% to all of the damage I'm dealing because I have barrier up at all times. You do want to socket your weapons with critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies in this build, because we're basing this build around crits and we're basing this around vulnerable damage. Plus crits and vulnerable are the 2 multiplicative sources of damage, so by beefing up both of them we are going to be doing massive damage. Now if you look at my stats on this weapon, this is the most important part to kind of like look at what you're going to be hunting for when you're looking for gear. You want bonuses to different damage buckets. Damage buckets are a concept in these types of games where you pull damage from different sources, and it's important to understand where you're getting damage from so you don't load too much bonus damage into one bucket, right? Because you're going to have diminishing returns on that. So the buckets that are important to note is anything that says damage to, damage versus. So like damage versus slowed, damage versus chilled, damage versus injured. Those are going to be in the same bucket. Now, these are all additive. So you have your core damage based on your attack power, based on your core skill damage, which is also determined by your intelligence. So you have your base damage. Then another bucket is the bonuses that you get from that base damage from intelligence. Another damage bucket is the bonuses that you get from critical strike damage and then vulnerable damage. So, and these are multiplicative. The ones that I believe intelligence is multiplicative. But so is critical strike, and so is vulnerable. So you want to beef up critical strike, you want to beef up vulnerable, and you want to put, I like to put at least 1 damage to slowed, damage to crowd controlled, damage to burning. I'd say that the best one in this build is either cold damage, because all of your damage is cold damage, and it has a 100% uptime, you're always going to be doing cold damage. Whereas in this on this roll that I have here, if the enemy is not slowed, basically if I have not hit them with a blizzard, I'm not getting the benefits of that 21% increased damage, right? So if I'm not getting the benefits from it, I might as well not have it. So having 100% uptime on that skill or that attribute is very important. So the best ones are cold damage, right? Or frost skill damage, because you're always doing those. Crowd controlled is really good too, because you're doing a lot of crowd control. So that's going to have a pretty high uptime, because that counts as your freeze, it counts as your chills, it counts as any other movement impairment, which is really nice. But I'd say that with this build, the best one to have, besides cold or frost, is damage versus burning targets, because you're always applying burn. Enemies are going to be perma burning. So damage versus burning is a very good one to have here. As you see, I have intelligence. So this is it's just touching on all of the buckets, right? I'm beefing up my core skill damage, I'm beefing up my intelligence, I'm beefing up my vulnerable damage, and then I'm doing damage to slowed enemies. In a perfect world, I would probably drop the core skill damage bonus for a critical strike damage multiplier, because again, that is bonus damage. It is not additive, it's multiplicative. So I would drop core skill damage for critical strike if you could get a better roll. This one just doesn't have it. On your secondary here, so this one you guys can't see, but it's the imprinted aspect that I have is core or mastery skills cast at or above 100 mana gain 34% increased critical strike chance. Now with this build, since it's a lucky hit build and we have that avalanche passive that is going to be proccing free casts all the time, we are going to be at or above 100 mana a lot. So we're going to have 34% increased critical strike chance when we're at or above 100 mana, and those increased critical strikes are also going to potentially be proccing lucky hits, which could reset defensive skills and also be, you know, just keeping the synergy going with all the different benefits that we have. As you can see, the reason I'm using a one-handed weapon as well is because you get lucky hit chance on the weapon, right? So it gives you lucky hit. It's going to be giving you more attack speed, which gives you higher DPS because you're not running out of mana once you have all of these things put together. Until you have all these aspects, I would definitely run a basic skill instead of like teleport or blizzard. This way you can do something if you're out of mana, right? But this has lucky hit chance. This has cooldown reduction. We have a cooldown centric build. That's really important. Increased crowd control duration. We're doing a lot of crowd control. Increased lucky hit chance. Everything's lucky hit. Mana cost reduction just helps us get snowballing, and increased critical strike chance. Really good synergy on all this, and I have a green gem in here as well. This one, you deal 18% increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier. Again, always have a barrier pretty much at all times. Vulnerable enemies pretty much at all times. I'm going to be dealing bonus damage all the time. Increased crit strike chance plus max life, I think, is crucial as a skill or as an attribute on your rings, because when you level them up, you get a lot of bonus life. If you look, I have 4,600 HP. 4,600 HP as a mage is very, very good. Because your barriers are a percentage of your max health. So the more max health you have, I have max health gems in here in this armor. The more max health you have, the bigger the barrier anyways. So I think it's kind of bait to double dip into more barrier with these gems or with barrier generation, because if you have more health anyways, then you're going to be getting a bigger barrier on top of that because of the increased max health. And when you don't have a barrier in those couple seconds that are crucial, you have more HP to deal with as a resource if you do get hit. So it's just 100% uptime on your max health. Bonus crit strike damage, insanely good roll on this ring. Damage to chilled enemies, I'm doing chill at all times pretty much as well. This ring rolled with 33% vulnerable damage bonus, plus 12 max mana. It's nice to go over 100 max mana if you can. This way you are going to be with the regen and stuff. It just gives you a little bit of a buffer to be at or above 100 for this aspect. Damage to injured enemies, it's okay. That gives me like a little bit of an execute, you know, it's just what this ring rolled with. And I got more max life. I have 500 max life on this ring. Now this amulet, we already went through. You can get a bunch of different passive bonuses on amulets. I'm not sure what other items they can roll on, but you want to be looking for bonuses to like permafrost. You can get bonuses to hoarfrost, right? Those passives, permafrost, increased damage to elites, and Hoarfrost is increased damage to chilled and frozen targets. These are massive damage multipliers as well. I think either of these are good substitutes or add-ons if you can manage to get them into your build. Now, let's talk about the last bits of this build that really bring it together. You're going to be looking for certain glyphs. The exploit glyph is really good because for every 5 dexterity purchased, you know, I have it socketed here. The red is the range in which it's giving these bonuses. So for every 5 dex that I've bought in here, which dex here, dex here, dex there, you get the point. I'm getting bonus vulnerability damage, right? 1% increased. And if you have the requirements of having plus 25 within that range, you will deal damage to a vulnerable enemy. Your damage dealt to a vulnerable enemy increases by 1% for 6 seconds up to 10%. So you're just going to be doing tons of damage, tons of instances of damage. Blizzard's going to be ticking multiple times, applying chill. Your Ice Shards are going to be hitting 5 times, up to 5 times, applying vulnerable and burn. So, and you're going to be doing damage with your burn. Each tick of that is going to be counting as dealing damage as well, which is just going to ramp your damage massively. So if you haven't done the Paragon board yet, or you don't really know how it works, basically you just put points into these. They're just raw bonuses to your skills. These rare nodes you can work towards. They give you pretty good bonuses. This is resistance and max life. I wouldn't worry about filling out your entire board or a bunch of different stuff in these areas, especially early. You just want to make sure that you're getting to the end of the board so that you can attach another board. Once you attach another board, you're going to get bonuses, and then you can work towards what's called a legendary node. So there's a bunch of different legendary nodes for each class. There's a couple that are really good for Frost in the sorcerer tree. I have 2 of the 3 of them already. One of them is this one. It's called Icefall. If you kill a frozen enemy, it grants you a barrier for 15% of your health for 5 seconds. We're going to be freezing enemies all the time, generating more barriers. This is just going to give us more uptime and more control in fights, more survivability, and all of the bonuses of having a barrier, like the bonus damage, the bonus damage reduction, etc., etc. Then if you build over to this board right here, if you get to the end of it, it's really long to get to here. Eventually, once I have the points, I want to get a glyph socketed in here or here. You want to take a look at the rare nodes and what they can possibly net you, whether it's more chill, which is really good, damage reduction from chilled enemies. This one is cold damage bonus and chill application, so you can get more CC from your Paragon boards, which is really nice, because if you're lacking it in your kit, whatever of those passives you didn't take, or whatever those bonuses you didn't take in your skill tree, you can make up for it in the Paragon board and start benefiting this way. So there's other ways of getting stuff into your kit if you couldn't squeeze out everything you wanted in your gear or your skill trees. The second node is dealing cold damage to vulnerable enemies, increases your lucky hit chance by 1% for 5 seconds up to 15%. We're going to be doing constant cold damage with all of those hits of Ice Shards, the bonuses from Ice Shards going to the frozen enemies, the chill that we're going to be applying, and the damage we're going to be applying from Blizzard in an AoE. We will be generating tons of lucky hit chance, which will then snowball the rest of our build. Now, I'll show you some examples of how this build will just pump out damage to groups and how you'll stay at basically above 100 mana at all times. It's very important when kiting with this build to drop a blizzard or a couple blizzards on big groups of enemies if you don't have Frost Nova up, and to just line them up. Look at how these Ice Shards are just piercing through all of these enemies in a line, and every single enemy that it's hitting is giving a chance to proc Avalanche. So I'm proccing Avalanche constantly, and that constant uptime is giving me free casts, building my mana bar back up, and keeping me alive in fights. And of course, when your Frost Nova's up, feel free to just go in and absolutely decimate small groups of enemies. Just be careful that if you do teleport in, that's one of your big defensives to get out of dangerous situations. So if you pop your Frost Nova and your teleport to engage in a fight, just be cognizant of the fact that you don't have those to then get out, which if you get caught, see, I'm vulnerable and there's a bunch of scary stuff on the ground. I don't want to get caught in that, so I pop my big defensive cooldown. Now my Frost Nova's back up, and I can finish off the fight with relative ease.